name is Linda Sheldon-Fell.
And I'm Angie Cartwright.
And here at the Grief Diaries, it is a television show where we sit and talk, share our hearts, our losses, our journeys, and our hope. And we are on location tonight in beautiful Lake Tahoe, and we have a guest who lives locally, and a number of years ago, his story played out in front of the media extensively. He was featured on Oprah Winfrey Show, 2020, Dateline, because of a horrible mistake that claimed the life of his family. When his wife was in labor with his firstborn, she was given a blood transfusion that was tainted with HIV. And this was back when HIV was very new, very unknown, and it would not be for 2 more years when they discovered the medical error. And one by one, it claimed the life of first his second-born son, Brian, his wife, Lydia, and then finally his 12-year-old son, Matthew. Tonight, we have with us a very special guest. He wrote a book chronicling his stories and his losses in the book called Out of the Ashes, Healing in the Afterloss, author Benjamin Scott Allen. Welcome to the show, Benjamin.
Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Now, you've been on our radio show, the Good Grief Talk Show, and now we're moving into a television show, Grief Diaries, and your story played out extensively when it was happening, and around the world. And you were caught up in not only dealing with the emotions of realizing that a horrible medical error had taken place and the future was unknown. No medications were available yet. It really was new territory for the medical field, and your family was at the center of it. And one by one, it took the lives of everyone in your family but you.
Right.
Take us back to when you first got that phone call that the blood transfusion that Lydia had had while she was giving birth to your firstborn, Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
You got the phone call after your secondborn was just a few months old.
Correct. Yes.
Tell us what happened then.
Well, you talk about it being in the public eye. At that point, it wasn't in the public eye, but it was. We were actually. Brian was about 3.5 months old when we got the call, and Brian had had a lot of medical problems. Matt had had a lot of medical problems, and Lydia had had a lot of medical problems since Matt's birth, and we didn't know what it was. We didn't know. It was just baffling to us what was going on. And then we got the call and asking us all to be tested. It was called the Look Back Program. Okay. That was after March of 1985 when they finally came up with an HIV test. And one of the donors, or the donor that gave the blood to the blood bank, and they used it with Lydia, tested HIV positive. And so they went back to see who had received that transfusion, found us, gave us a call, and said, would you all be tested? And all 3 of them were HIV positive, and I was negative.
And so from that point, when you received that phone call, Brian passed, your second-born, was what, 5 months old? Or 3?
Brian was around 5 months old when we got the call, and he died at 8.5 months old.
Okay, so that was your first loss.
Correct. Correct. And we lost a lot of things along the way. I lost my job. Mm-hmm. We lost where we lived. We had to move in the middle of the night. Her records have been distributed around the hospital, around where I worked. And it was a time of mass hysteria. So we basically fled in the night. So we lost everything. And in the midst of that, we're losing each other.
Mm. And so did you know when the call came, and all of a sudden you had this is why he's been so ill? Did you know that he would only have a few months left? What was the prognosis they gave you?
Well, at that time, HIV hadn't even been termed HIV, it was still AIDS. And still to this day, the last part of the diagnosis is AIDS.
Okay.
But the infection itself has to transform into the latter stages. But what happened to us was when we got the call and we were all tested and we found out who was positive and that I wasn't, that Lydia looked at me because she had had all these medical problems. Matt, we went to specialist after specialist after specialist. He was not healthy, and we couldn't figure out why. Brian was not healthy. Brian both Matt and Brian spent their first months in intensive care.
Okay.
And so we had Brian on a heart monitor, and then we, all this medical unknown. And Lydia said after the call and after we were tested and found out the status, she said, well, at least we know what it is. Mm-hmm. And living in that unknown was as maddening as living in the known.
Sure, sure. And so did you, I would imagine that because you were then handed a diagnosis, you began the phase of preparatory grief.
Correct. Grief happens in a lot of different ways in a lot of different stages. And one of the passages in the book is there's a Unitarian minister in the 1800s that had a sermon said, where does the sky begin? Mm. And does it begin just on inches from the ground? Does it begin up in the sky? How further up? And I related that in the book to where does grief begin? Did it begin at the phone call? Right. Did it begin when Matt was deteriorating? Did it begin when he was not thriving? They said that Matt had a failure to thrive, and we couldn't understand why. Did grief begin there? Right. Was it when loss happens in relation to the expectation not being fulfilled, and the ultimate is the loss is one's death, and that wanting another day, wanting to be with the one you love, one more moment. Mm-hmm. And that's the ultimate loss. Mm-hmm. But losses happen all incrementally all along the way. And preparatory grief was very much a part of our lives because Brian died at 8.5 months old. We knew for 3.5 months. It was the longest 3.5 months of my life, and how he suffered and what we went through and the upheaval that we went through. But Matt was around 3 years old when his little brother died. Lydia lived about 4 years beyond Brian. And then Matt died a month after his 13th birthday. So that was about 3 years past Lydia. So the preparatory grief was ongoing, and the depths of grief itself for each one that we loved, that we lost, that died, was there as well. And so preparatory grief can help to a certain degree, right, but it never really prepares us. It didn't prepare me.
Sure.
I knew what it felt like when Brian died, but it was different when Lydia died, mm-hmm, and it was different when Matt died.
How, can you explain how?
The difference was that in every relationship is unique. Right. And it's I love both of my children, but can anyone love equally everybody? I don't know. I'm not of that ilk. I can love deeply and to the best of my ability with each one, but it's different. And with Brian, there was a tenderness and a love that in our connection. Matt's connection, and Matt and I were very different. We connected at the moment of his birth. We connected through his life. We were very, very close. Lydia and I connected. Obviously, I had known her since I was 11 years old. We had a lot of history. We had a lot of depth in the relationship. And that's different. It's different from losing a child to losing a spouse, to when my mother died, that was different. When my brother died, that was different. But it doesn't mean I love less or more. I just love different.
Sure, sure. Yeah, each loss is as unique as one's fingerprint.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we can have similar stories, but the dynamics around each story would influence how you process that loss and how you walk your journey.
That's a very good point. It's a very good way of putting it, processing the loss. Because for me, it is a process. It's an ongoing process that will go on the rest of my life.
Yes.
And the reason I called the book Out of the Ashes, Healing in the After Loss, is because I needed a term that described where I was, that the ones that I loved, they talk about going into the afterlife. And I could not live in the world of before.
Right.
And so as they went to the afterlife, I was living in the after loss.
And I talk a lot about, and we hear often it said that we're, as soon as someone dies or passes, we're in the grief world. And so when I saw your book and I seen the after loss, I thought that's our world, the after loss. The world that we have now lived in, because your life changes in that moment.
It does,
It
and
really
I think what's misunderstood in society, at least in our culture, in that people feel it's very common for people to see grief as almost like an illness. It'll run its course, and then you'll be fine. Almost like you've got, you know, a virus that'll run, you know, 6 to 8 months, and then you'll feel better and be moving on. But profound loss results in a grief that is lifelong, and it's life-altering.
Right.
And hence part of the reason why we have developed Grief Diaries is to help people outside of the after loss, the grief world, you know, understand that it is not a short-term transition and then you're all better.
Absolutely.
It leaves a scar that's invisible, and it's a lifelong change. And for many that have profound grief, it changes who they are as a human being.
Completely.
And the loved ones around them, the colleagues, the neighbors, they don't understand that. And so suddenly they have this grieving person who they don't know. It looks like the old Linda or the old Angie or the old Benjamin, but they are someone different, and they're waiting for the old one to come back.
And the pain's on the inside.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, in my experience, that waiting for someone to come back, for me to return to who I was, there is no was.
No.
There only is. And my experience with grief is that when someone dies that I am very close to and that I have that strong connection, a part of me goes with them and a part of them stays with me. And part of that grief work is the reintegration of the new me, the new relationship with the one I love, and the new relationship to the world.
Sure.
And in that, when someone goes, well, when are you going to get back to normal? You know, what I look at and I say, that normal's gone. And part of the grief work is moving into the new normal.
New normal.
It's a new normal. It's a new way of how I relate to life. And it is a constant interchange with what has left. There's a hole in me. But what has been left to me, there's a tenderness. There is a filling, not of that hole, but there's a filling of my life in a different way. And that's why people feel like, for me, I felt like I was such a surreal world, and I was out of context in the world before, and that's why I needed to come up with the after loss. I am in the world of the after loss, and that's okay. That's all right to be there, and I don't have to be somebody that I was, because that person is just as gone as the one I love.
Sure, sure. Now, Matthew passed in
1995.
95, okay. And Lydia before him.
92.
And Brian before.
86.
So had society's view of grief, were you treated differently after each loss because a little bit of time had elapsed? Or do you feel that the people around you you still had the same support or lack of support. You know, because as we work to bring grief out of the dark and into the light by talking candidly and uncensored about what grief, how it transforms our lives, did you feel there was a difference in the support you received or the understanding or the awareness between first Brian and then Matthew? Because there was a number of years.
Well, it really would be hard to evaluate that, because when Brian died, we were living in secret. The societal hysteria had driven us underground. So when Brian died, we were basically alone. We had support from the family and the love and support of people that knew, but many people didn't know Brian died. And because if they found out, well, Brian died, how did he die? AIDS. Well, how did he get AIDS? Well, that would put Matt in jeopardy. And so we wanted to give Matt a normal life as long as we could. So that's very different. But what I found was that people were very supportive. And my grief was so complex because of loss, preparatory grief. There was also the societal aspect. The reason our story went public, and it was in the New York Times, it was in Dateline 2020, Today Show, all those kind of things, was not about the loss, but about the HIV and how we were treated.
Oh, okay.
So it was not about the death of Brian or the oncoming death of Lydia or Matt. It was about the sensationalism that the news media put together was around the epidemic and how it was treating people, which was rightly so. I mean, I had no problem with that. But and I felt like we could be a voice for people that had no voice.
Sure.
So we were willing to do that. Matt was willing to do that. We did not go public until after Lydia died.
Okay.
Okay.
And the reason we went public, Lydia and I talked about this a lot. We decided that we were going to give Matt a very normal life, as long as possible. And if it ever became public about the HIV, then we would go public. If the school found out, the teacher always knew, the principal always knew, but if the parents started finding out, then we would go public. At Lydia's funeral, it started getting out that she died of AIDS, and Matt was sick with AIDS, and that's when we went public. So Matt and I talked about it, and Matt was 9 when she died, and so we had a conversation, and he said, "Yes, let's go, let's do that."
So your journey was not just about you in preparatory grief, loss. It was also, you had a son who was also facing the loss of his mother and his own end of life.
Right.
How was that for you?
Well, it was more complicated than that. I had a wife who had lost a child, that she was deeply, deeply connected with Brian, and she lost a child. She herself was losing her life, and she was going to lose her life before Matt lost his. So she was going to be leaving a child that was going to die ultimately of what she was dying of. And so she was, and our relationship, we as a husband and wife had a lot of, complex dynamics. And, but working with Matt in the loss of his little brother, in the loss of his mother, and in the loss of his own life, was quite intense. We went the distance. We really had a deep relationship. What I learned about grief, I learned in our relationship, is that you can't go around it, you can't ignore it, you just need to go through it. And so that's what we did. We leaned into every moment, and we approached every moment to its fullest, and its joys and its sorrows and its fear, and it's all of the above.
I think one time you said to me, I didn't teach my children how to live. I taught them how to die.
I had to teach my children how to die. And I had to come, Matt and I were very connected, and what we had to do was, he fed off of me. So I had to become very peaceful with death. I had to find peace in all areas of my life so I could hold a space for him to deal with his mother's death,
Right.
his brother's death, and his own death.
So you have put yours on hold.
Very much so. That's a very good point, Angie, is that what I had to do, there were two ways of putting it on hold. One is after putting Matt to bed,
Release.
it was released. I could go into my daily sorrow.
Right.
And yet still that was just in increments. What happened, the most devastating part of my loss was when Matt died, and it was all over. Because I never could fully grieve Brian,
Right.
because I needed to take care of Matt and hold a space
So
for
there
him
you're
so he
standing.
could grieve. Yeah,
Now we're just standing with you.
standing with me, and that's what and standing in that loss, and it was such a powerful, intense experience to be utterly alone and finding my way through, and that's where this whole thing around the integration and the reintegration,
Right.
and finding the fragments of my life and the fragments of their lives and how we fit again. And I'll give you an example. I moved off to Mendocino. It's on the northern California coast. And I was walking the cliffs. I did a lot of walking after Matt died. And I was walking the cliffs, and it was cool. And I was sitting there going, oh, this is cool. And then I realized, wait a minute. I like it cool. It was Lydia that didn't like it cool. And I just laughed. I just realized I had taken on a part of her.
Yeah.
And what I've always wanted to do is live in the mountains by the lake, and here I am in Tahoe.
And here you are.
But where did I move? I moved where Lydia loved the ocean. I needed to find, there was a reintegration process. And also, that's where I spread the ashes. I spread the ashes in the Pacific Ocean, not in Mendocino, but in the Pacific Ocean. So every time I looked at the Pacific Ocean, it was my burial waters.
It's like we have to go in and embrace and lean into it to get through it. I mean,
I remember a story you said about on your anniversary of your mother's death,
right.
of going to the Sonic.
Yes.
Oh, tell that story.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my mom, you know, I'm thinking, you know, you really think about what can you, when you have the anniversary or you have those things come up, you know, you see it all the time, and we see it all the time from many, you know, what can you do? What can you do on those days, you know? And I'm sorry, sometimes you're really angry about, I don't want to just let a balloon go, you know, you know what I mean? It just, not the balloon releases, because we did balloon releases and things like that, but so I'm driving the car and I'm crying and the music's up loud and, you know, I'm hating life, and it's the first year anniversary, I think, and there's the Sonic. And Sonic was just something that our family shared, and I used to like kind of pick on my mother because she would order her onion rings. We all loved our Sonic eyes, and that was from her. But she would take this little, real delicate ketchup packet, and she would tear it, and she'd take the onion ring and just gently, delicately just place it on top of the onion ring and eat it. And, you know, and I just, you know, you were at that place where you don't know what to do. And so I went in and I did exactly that. Yeah. And then it just released. I was with her in that moment.
And that's the reintegration process. That's why we need to touch those places.
Yeah.
I needed to go back and touch those places so I could be touched by them.
You still go back there.
I still go back. I go back to. I don't go to Mendocino. I go to Half Moon Bay, where
you release
where I release
roses.
Yeah, there's a ceremony that I have. If you want me to share that, the
Sure.
ceremony. It's a rose ceremony, they call it, and on the anniversary, I used to do it on their anniversaries of their birthdays and their death days. That's a lot of roses.
That's a lot of roses.
That's a lot of roses. But now I do it just on the anniversary of the deaths.
Okay.
And what I do is I get a rose. It's a different color for each one. Like I said, they're different. Yeah. And what I go to a body of water if I'm not by the ocean. I go to Lake Tahoe or I go to a river, and I take a petal off, and I think of a beautiful memory.
Okay.
And then I kiss the petal, and I let it go, and a thank you.
It's beautiful.
Thank you for this. What I remember this time we were laughing and watching Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Doo,
and I
yeah.
kissed the rose, and I said thank you. And then I get to all through the roses, and then I come to the stem, and I kiss the thorns, and I say thank you.
Tell us a little more about the thorns.
The thorns are all the painful parts.
that we have to honor.
Yeah, thank
Because
you.
good
it's
and
part
bad.
of the rose.
Yeah, it's part of the rose.
The good and the bad.
And if I negate the pain, I will negate the joy.
Exactly.
I have to have it all. And
A lot
that's
of times
why-
everybody wants to run from I did. I wanted to push away the pain. We only want to remember the good things. But the thing is that, like just in my mom's passing, there was the good, the bad, the ugly, the hairy, the scary, the humanness and everything. And so I want to honor all parts of that.
That's
all
good.
parts of her, all
Yeah.
parts of me.
Yeah.
And then us as you know, two people together in a
Yeah.
relationship that we had. So
Yeah.
honoring all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So and the thorns are part of that.
Yeah, they are.
You know, that makes up. It wouldn't be a rose without
Yeah.
the thorns.
Yeah. And then on October 4th is the anniversary of Matt's birth. And that was when she received the transfusion. And it was the most beautiful gift of my life to have this child. And yet it caused the death of 3 people.
Right.
And so on October 4th, I get a rose, a different color for each one, and I go through all 3.
Okay.
And to say, you know, that's part of my family. But otherwise, I honor each one individually.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Well, you know, with loss, and one of the reasons why society is so afraid to openly and candidly discuss loss and the grief is because it's very uncomfortable for them. But I feel it's really important that as we work to bring grief out of the dark into the light, to talk about blessings. I believe that there's a balance in everything we do in life. And so even with tragic loss, whether it's expected or unexpected, illness or accident, young or old, and no matter the relationship to you, it's painful. But there's always blessings. If your eyes and your heart are open enough, you might not see them for a long time.
For a long time, yeah.
And so have you seen any, I mean, clearly you are now remarried, and you have found your footing despite 3 tragic losses, and in the early days of AIDS, when so much was unknown. What blessings can you verbalize to us tonight?
sure. Well, many blessings. One of them is to appreciate every moment, and that life is beautiful in its unfolding, and it is a mystery to me. But what I found when there was a time when I would wake up and I would look at my child, and I think all I could think about in the morning was his funeral. And all I could think of, he's going to die, he's going to die. Something shifted for me when he was around 6 years old. And I woke up and I would say, yeah, he's going to die, but not today.
But not today.
And we were going to live the fullest of that day. And we did. And we lived every day to the fullest. And so he taught me that. He taught me many things. He was a very wise old soul as far as I'm concerned. And Lydia taught me a lot. And one of the things, one of the reasons people are uncomfortable with those that are grieving is because we have to deal with our own mortality. We have to deal with death. It's not just loss, we have to deal with
our
death
own.
and our own, and people are uncomfortable with that. Most of the people that I've seen that are going through the grief and going through the living in loss, that's what I call it, because grief has so much baggage for me. I prefer living in loss, because that's what we are. We are living in loss. And so, and I will live there the rest of my life. The after loss is an integral
Is a
part
part
of
of your life.
It's an integral part of life.
But it's not the entire part of your life.
No, but it is woven with all of life.
In the tapestry.
It's not. There's nothing separate from it. There's not. I don't go off and grieve over here and live with my wife over here.
Sure.
No, it's all, yeah.
Yeah, and what living in loss does, and the reintegration, is to weave it back into a life of love.
Sure.
And so, that's the greatest gift they gave me, is love. You know, and here's the thing about you know, the way that I've experienced this of part of me going and part of them staying. Someone asked me, well, what part of you went? Where'd that go? And I thought, well, that's a good question. I know what's staying with me, but that's a good question. And I got to thinking about it. It was like, I have been brought into the expanse. I have been brought to beyond this plane of existence being only it. I have been brought into the expanse of life itself that goes beyond this point in time. And that what that translates into is greater compassion, greater love, greater sense of service, a greater sense of opening. But I could not open until I unclenched.
Yeah.
And I had to clench. It hurt. And I had to go in and feel that hurt and follow that hurt wherever it went. Follow that sorrow wherever it went. And in my experience, every time I would lean into the anger, lean into the fear, lean into the sorrow, it would always take me to healing. And what that does for me is that it's like, the image that I get is like all of these emotions are like rivers that if I keep them flowing, if I keep in the fluidity, it will take me to the ocean. It will take me to the expanse.
It's like you gave yourself permission to grieve.
Yeah, exactly.
We have to. We are the ones.
Well, it took me a long time to say just what you said in 3 words.
Well, you know, I really.
Yeah, just yeah, that's
permission
it.
to grieve.
Yeah.
But you know, the thing is that I've dealt with grief where I did probably what society would want us to do, which really live in silence and grief. You know, we just, and you've lived in some silence and grief. She's lived, you know, many do. But as I found out that after my mom passed, I had come to a place, there's many losses in my life, and this loss for me was how it was different as I gave myself permission. I couldn't, I looked for validation from others to give me permission to grieve and all of those other losses. And the truth is, even if they would have given me permission, it has to come from me.
Right.
That's a very good point.
And it's the most empowering, it's the most saddest, empowering moment I've ever had when I said, you know, he said I did it my way. He says I did it my way. I grieved my way. So I think giving ourselves permission to lean into that pain does take us to healing.
Yeah, and it's the resistance that creates the suffering.
It makes it worse.
And I love the way you put that, is that giving ourselves permission is taking ownership. I needed to take ownership of what I was going through.
Right.
And to say, I'm all in. I am all in. I will go wherever this leads. After they all died and I went to Mendocino, you know, I wasn't a father anymore. I wasn't a husband anymore. My job had ended. I had, what I had to look at was, who am I? Who am I? And what am I here for? And what I decided in that my life purpose, my meaning, was to go as deeply into this process, to lean into it all the way, and to not resist, and to go wherever it took me. And it was a painful journey. It's not like, oh, it became easy. It became more difficult. But the meaning and the expanse of that meaning, to say, I will not turn away from my pain. I will not hide. I will hurt, and I will go wherever this takes me. And it took me into the expanse. It took me, here's an incredible experience that I wrote about in the book, but this woman in Mendocino, she had lost a child, a stepchild, at the age of 17 in a motorcycle accident. Her daughter, after that, her husband was murdered. And then after that, her daughter had cancer and died at the age of 20. And we would walk the cliffs together. And it was many years before. And that's another thing we can give each other, is that she had what I didn't at that moment. She had the experience of healing. And I was in the midst of the beginning parts of my healing. And she said to me something once. She said, always keep your finger in your heart and never let it close. And during that early times, I would actually have these waves of grief that would come out of nowhere, and I would just buckle up in a fetal position and be crying and in so much pain, and unbelievable pain. And in that, her image of keep your finger in your heart and never let it close. I did that through that pain, and it lasted for maybe 5 minutes or something. I couldn't breathe. And I was just, then I would just visualize keeping my finger in my heart. Every time I had one of those episodes, I felt the expanse of love. I felt more compassion.
What a beautiful gift she gave you.
Absolutely.
You know, what a profound, beautiful gift. But I do want to ask, as a father having lost not one but 2 children and your beloved wife, did you ever feel like you wanted to jump off those cliffs?
Yeah, and just a little story before I spread the ashes. And I spread the ashes of Brian and Matt on the anniversary of Lydia's death. And before that, I went back to San Francisco, because that's where the Spread the Ashes was, just south of San Francisco. And that's where that's where Matt was born. That's where a lot of touchstones around there. And one of the things that Lydia and I did before we left, well, actually Lydia and I spent our honeymoon out there. And then one of the things before we left to move to Colorado was we went to the Golden Gate Bridge, and under the pylon of the, on the city side, we had this wonderful, beautiful, romantic kiss. So I was walking back there and waiting for the day to spread their ashes, and a policeman stopped and said, you know, you okay? Because thought I was going to jump. You know, they monitor jumpers there, and I looked like a prime candidate, and I would have probably. There were many days that when I would cross that bridge, I wanted to just stop the car and just walk over and jump.
And I think that that is very common.
Very common.
You know, for in the early days especially, I know myself, I wanted to go be with my daughter. And people would say, and of course I wasn't actively suicidal, and I never verbalized it for fear that they would cart me off to the nearest psych ward. And I had a family that was in shock and needed me. But the thought went through myself a number of times of, I can't do this. I can't do this. I am too much pain. I want to go be with my lovey. And yet instinctively I knew that had it been my time to go as well, that I would have been in the car with her. And so it wasn't my time. Therefore, there was some purpose left after, in the absence of, you know, but I think many, especially, and I can only speak for a parent grieving for a child, that comes up a lot in the closed Facebook groups of mothers who've lost a child, that I can't do this. And everyone's real worried that they are, you know, actively considering suicide. Well, it is very normal to feel like you can't do it. It's very normal. And I think, while the unthinkable does happen on occasion, I think it's important that we bring it out in the open, because it's not limited to just parents who've lost a child. It is, you know, I think it's safe to say that many, many grievers, regardless of who they lost, how they lost them, or how long it's been, you know, there are still similarities.
Yeah, I when my husband died in 1996, I attempted 4 times.
And that was, you were newly married,
21 years old, and you know,
horrific car accident.
And in that place, and I tried 4 different times. And when my mom passed in 2010, you know, you think about that hopelessness and stuff like that, but I was, I guess, in a different place. And I think the thing is, you know, we talk about gifts and the gifts that you had received with you know, you think gift and death. How do you get blessings and gifts from this tragedy? And if you're not there, you're not there yet. But you know, I remember sitting in front with my children on all sides of me, in front of my mother's coffin, and thinking, I don't want my children to have to go through this. And you know, and that was the gift that she had given me, was to, and has given our family, was to keep going. And it's bittersweet. of course.
Right.
But it didn't come right away. Those gifts don't come right away because you're like, somebody comes and tells you, hey, well, what are the gifts out of this? You're going to probably punch them in the face. I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, you're going to
Yeah.
look at them like
Those are
they're-
really, really private. They don't come automatically. They're not seen as gifts for a while. There's, you know, it took a while for that to come, but when it did come, it was a very overwhelming, powerful release of, you know, it was like a fight for life. I think sometimes people don't understand that when you lose somebody, you almost have to fight for your life.
Right.
You know, when Brian died and Lydia and Matt wanted to live so desperately,
Right.
and I wanted to die, and I felt so bad. I had so much survivor's guilt,
Right.
and I had this: why am I alive? Why am I healthy? And watching my family deteriorate day after day, and it was so painful, and I just wanted to die, and they just so desperately wanted to live.
Yeah.
And even after that, when of course I stayed alive when Brian died for Letty and Matt, then I stayed alive for Matt. Then when Matt was gone, I said, why am I
There's
alive?
nothing, yeah.
Why am I alive? And suicide was very much a part of
Everyday thought.
every day. Every day I just wanted to end it. But there's something, but I leaned into it. I leaned into the suicidal thoughts. I leaned into the despair. That's what I needed to lean into. I just want I remember once when Lydia and Matt were still alive and we were going through some really very difficult times, I just said to this universe, hit me with your best shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what else can you hit me with?
Right.
Exactly.
What
Right.
else? And that was at the end of that, and there's a lot of fight there. I was just like, okay, you're going to take me under. But after they all died, the fight was gone. And it was like, I surrender. I surrender to whatever I need to feel. And I felt the isolation, the aloneness, and the wanting to die.
And I'd like to say that leaning into grief is completely opposite of what our society wants us to do, right?
Right. They
It's
want us to
completely
sweep it
opposite.
under the rug.
But and I was taught about the same way. I mean, when I was growing up, my parents were taught the same way. And so when a person is seen as they're leaning into, it can be viewed as they're in self-pity, they're stuck,
Yes. Or victim.
they're victimized, or they're, and all that. And so, thank you for the after loss, because it's the way you put it into words is amazing, and it makes it look, I don't know what the word is. I hate to say beautiful, but it is beautiful
It's
for me.
a beautiful story.
Because there is life after loss. There is beauty in pain. But to not be afraid to lean into, because really what we're wanting to hope for the next person who has to sadly have tragic loss that happens every day is to not run from it. So maybe healing happens a little bit better for them. I don't know, on their own time and in their own way, but I've had two opposite ways. I ran from grief, and then I ran into grief, and the healing was completely different.
And you also, I would suggest, ran through it. Not ran, but you went through it.
Went through every
You gotta
inch
go
of
through
it,
it.
every moment
You
of
gotta
it,
go
every
through it.
second of it.
You know, I had a dream not long after losing our daughter in an accident. And in this dream, and I've written about it, in this dream, I was desperately chasing the sunset. It was a sun that was setting in the west, and I was running as fast as I could, desperately trying to catch that setting sun. And coming behind me from the east was this very scary, very dark blackness, the black abyss.
Right.
And I was very afraid of it, very scared of it, didn't want it to reach me. I was trying to catch the sun that was setting. And then I stopped. I was told in the dream that I had to stop, turn around, and face the oncoming black abyss, because you have to walk through the night before you see the sunrise again. And
Makes
that was a
sense.
gift that heaven gave to me, Allie gave to me, whoever gave it to me. I'm grateful, because I understood then that the only way to find my footing again in life and to help those on the path behind us, as
Exactly.
you were both doing, is to walk through it, walk through that scary darkness. And so, you know, but yet we are, all three of us, are living examples of the possibilities of creating a beautiful, fulfilling life again in the after loss.
You know, that is a beautiful dream, and that is so true. That's the epitome of health to me. That was such a gift. And
It was.
and to move in, we all have to move into the abyss to find our way through it. And when you were speaking, one of the things that came to my mind is that we are not alone in the abyss.
No.
No.
And what
Which is
and
why we're doing what we're doing.
exactly, and that, you know, it's a very individual. Grief is and sorrow and loss is a very individual path that we all go through.
We all do.
And there's a collective, and to be able to come and to sit with another, and just like that friend sat with me that had gone through all that tragedy, and she gave me a gift to never let my heart close. And she knew that because she had gone through her abyss. Somebody had walked with her. She walked with me. And part of me staying alive was perhaps I can walk with another.
Exactly.
And that's what you're doing, that's what you're doing, that's what you're doing with the Grief Diaries, that's what you're doing with life, is to say, the gift I can give to life is to stay alive and to live in that loving, giving life to another.
Yeah, that we can give them hope.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we do with by talking about it candidly, openly, uncensored, the good, the bad, the uncensored, because there are good parts to grief. There are very ugly parts to grief. And when we start talking about it openly, people become less fearful and more understanding of what our journeys are about. And thus they can then learn how to support us better.
Exactly.
Well, and vice versa, you know, there's a thing that what we can give to another is, and what I received was the space to be real. And we can do that by communicating our realness. We can, and what we are going through. That we don't live in a facade, we don't live, you know, grief is life-threatening.
It is.
And so what we do is offer a space, and I've said this on many occasions, is that those that don't know what to say. And those that do know there's nothing that can be said.
Exactly.
But we can be there. We can sit with another. And what others would see as self-pity and all this, we see as part of the process.
Their process.
Of their process of, and to hold an unconditional space to say, I know that hurt, and I know what I've done to heal, but I would never take away your hurt. Like you said, it's self-permission.
Yes,
It is self-ownership. And when it's time to move and translate that hurt, that hurt's always going to be there for me,
Right.
but translate it into a healing. I ought to explain what I mean by healing. You know, I have healing in the after loss. Healing for me is finding peace in the hurt. Healing for me is finding that I can be real and that I still feel the loss. Healing for me is saying some days I can't get out of bed.
Yes.
Healing for me is saying, no thanks world, not today.
Not today.
Yeah, you know, that's healing for me.
It's really honoring yourself and who you are.
Yes.
Healing is not going back into somebody that I was. Healing is not to live a false life. Healing for me is to be authentic
Exactly.
in every moment. And so to find that and to offer that space, that healing in the after loss, is that I want everyone to know it's okay. You don't have to live on somebody else's timetable.
Right.
You don't have to, it's never over as far as my experience. It may be for some, I can't speak for them, but it's not over for me. It's how I find peace in the midst of the loss. And that's why I call it living in loss rather than grieving.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, Angie and I are very active on social media, and you're welcome to look us up on Good Grief WW, which stands for Good Grief Worldwide on Facebook, National Grief Awareness Day, of which Angie is the president, Benjamin's the vice president, I'm the secretary on the board, and you know, we also have a number of closed Facebook groups for grievers. And recently, Angie and I posted a poster on the Grief Diaries page that said, you know, there's nothing to say to a griever. People often ask, well, I don't know what to say to you. And so many of us get the people that when they see us coming down the sidewalk, they'll actually cross the street and come up the other sidewalk pretending they didn't see you. And, you know, people do not know what to do with grievers. And so we recently posted a poster, which we are both very fond of doing. And it says, how to support a griever. Listen, hug, repeat. There are no words that takes away the sting.
It's pure presence.
Yes.
It's
And just the hugs are priceless.
That's presence, and that's to stand with another. And in my experience, people stood next to me
Yeah.
in my aloneness,
And I as well.
but I did not feel disconnected.
Right.
When we feel disconnected, I knew there were those that were there. The best thing people gave me was the realness and just the support and silence. That was so much a part of my healing.
They walked with you, not directed you.
Yeah, or tried to fix it.
Tried to fix it.
Please,
Exactly.
you know, I mean,
Yeah.
anybody watching
Yeah.
this or part of it that has lost knows it's unfixable.
Yeah, you'll only overwhelm
Yeah, it's not.
us and them by trying to fix it. But you know, I think it's really important to help our viewers that are not grieving but might have a loved one that is
It is
grieving.
grieving.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
help them understand what can they do. And that, for me, I often get things that come into my head, usually when I'm laying down at night. And I'll write them down, and then the next morning I will get up and start working on it. And that was one of them. Hug, listen, hug, repeat. And it's so simple, yet powerful. It's profound. And, you know, I was surrounded by love in not only my family, my friends, my community. I continue to be to this day. But there are many, many grievers who are not. And
There's a lot living in silence.
and that's what Angie and I and you, by joining us on the Grief Diaries tonight, are reaching out to those that do not have support. You know, we want you to know you're not walking alone. We are in the black abyss with you. We have found joy in our hearts to balance the sadness, which has helped us to find our footing in life. You know, I no longer want to jump off the rocks, the ledge. You know,
Right.
no one has to talk me back from the edge.
Yeah.
Truly, and I truly have moments of beauty in my life, and I'm so grateful. When I hear the birds sing, I am so grateful that I have walked through the darkness enough to hear the birds singing. And that's such a beautiful thing that, you know, I want the grievers that don't have support to allow us to support them.
Right.
And that, you know, if we can get through it, they can too.
You know, there's another element that's be another show is to look at how some people won't give themselves permission to heal
They won't.
because they think if they get better, then they're going to lose the ones they love.
Right.
And that's not the case in my experience. That what I found, the better I get, the closer I
The
get.
closer we get.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so it's just the opposite.
It's the opposite.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Your book, Out of the Ashes, Healing in the Afterloss, is profound.
Thank you.
I read it cover to cover as one griever to another. It was beautifully written. You held nothing back. You talked about your journey after Matthew had finally passed.
All right.
And where can people buy this book?
They can get it on Amazon. They can go to the website, www.theafterloss.com, and order it there. And so those are the two places that. But the first part of the book is what we went through from the beginning to when Matt died. The second part of the book is what I needed to go through to come into my
And the
healing
afterloss.
and defining the afterloss, and the complete part of the afterloss. But that's the two parts, and that's the journey.
And you were very authentic.
Yes.
You were uncensored in your journey in the afterloss. And I found that refreshing because it matched a lot of my own
Good.
elements of grief. And by doing so, that helped me to heal.
Good.
And so I would imagine that those who read your book, you have touched the lives of thousands and helped them to make a healing step forward just by publishing your story. And there's many books on grief out there. You know, there's thousands and some that are very, very good. They all offer something. But I found this particularly touching because your story is so profound. You didn't lose just one loved one. You lost 3 over a span, and then you were alone. And you wrote it authentically from the heart into this book. And what a gift it is.
Thank you.
It's absolutely beautiful. If you haven't seen his book, Out of the Ashes, Healing in the Afterloss, Amazon.com, and it is a must read. A must read. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
And thank you for having us or being on our show.
Thank you.
You know, you've been on our radio show a couple times, and it's always a joy.
It's always a joy.
Yeah.
And you know, you're with us tonight as we launch the Grief Diaries, and so people can see us up close and personal as we talk about our grief, uncensored.
I think the thing I'd like to say is there is no one I would rather have start the show with than you.
Yes.
Because I was leaning into my loss, and it's not, society does not accept that. And when I started reading your book and just your experience, you were doing the same. You just had different words for it. And I knew that was a gift. I knew I was on the right track. And thank you for that. Giving people permission to give themselves permission.
Yeah.
You know, basically.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Thank you, Angie.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, this is. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the reasons I wrote the book, I was already in that healing place, but what I want is to, in those pages, that we touch each other
Yeah.
and touch lives. That it's not just my story, it's our story.
It's our story.
It's our story.
Right.
I saw myself in there.
Good.
Yeah.
I beautifully said. I found myself in there as well, in
Right.
different
Good.
parts.
That was
And
that's-
you know, what a lovely gift you have given the many grievers that are behind you on the journey. And I think that by doing what we're doing with Grief Diaries, National Grief Awareness Day, Good Grief Worldwide, Grief the Unspoken, you know, we are helping those behind us. And that's
Walking
truly
with them.
walking with them. Yeah.
Yeah.
as they walk with us,
That's right.
so-
Yeah.
They carry us every day.
They
yeah.
do. That's true.
Yes.
Very, very true. Yeah.
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 It's a solitary journey that we don't have to live in solitude.
Exactly.
Yep, that's right. So thank you for being with us
Thank you.
tonight. Grief Diaries, here in Lake Tahoe, with author Benjamin Scott Allen. Out of the Ashes, Healing in the Afterloss. His book is on Amazon.com. You can also find it by finding us at griefdiaries.com, goodgriefww.com, nationalgriefawarenessday.com, and on Facebook, Grief the Unspoken, Good Grief WW, Grief Diaries. I mean, we have all kinds of, we're all over.
You can find it everywhere.
That's right. And so join us next time in Nashville, where we will be interviewing a Grammy winner, a beautiful singer-songwriter, Beth Nielsen Chapman. And we look forward to seeing you there. And send us a request if you'd like us to come to your city. Go to our website, griefdiaries.com, and send us a message, and we'll see what we can do to come to your city. So thank you for joining us tonight here at Grief Diaries. Thank you, Benjamin,
Thank
for
you,
being
Benjamin.
part of it
Thank you.
and being part of the beautiful story. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night.
Good night.
Good night.